for coming. So I'm going to start us off with an introduction to the basic principles and practices of biodynamics as a foundation for talking about growing biodynamic seed. And I got my start in biodynamic farming 15 years ago as an apprentice on this farm, Mendocino Organics, in Northern California. Biodynamics has been going on for much longer than 15 years. It started almost a century ago in the 1920s in Europe, which was in the beginning of the industrialization of agriculture, the introduction of chemical inputs and a lot more mechanization. And as people were starting to adopt these modern ways of farming, there were some farmers who noticed a decline in the vitality and fertility of their seeds, of their animals. And some of them knew the work of a man named Rudolf Steiner, who is a philosopher and scientist who was working to integrate scientific understanding with the recognition of spirit and nature. And they approached him and asked if he could provide some insights into how they could really bring back the health of their farms. And that resulted in a series of lectures called Spiritual Foundations for the Renewal of Agriculture in 1924 that Rudolf Steiner gave to farmers, and those formed the foundation of biodynamic agriculture. And since 1924, biodynamics has been developed and evolved through the collaboration of many researchers, farmers, scientists all around the world. So Aaron Fried Pfeiffer brought biodynamics from Europe to the United States in the 1930s and was one of the founders of the Biodynamic Association, which I work with. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary this year. And then since the 1930s, there's been many collaborations of farmers and researchers looking at how do we really apply these things that Steiner said that were the reintroduction of some peasant wisdom along with modern science, looking at how we can really bring vitality to our farms and to our food. At this point, biodynamics is practiced all over the world. I was just in India a few months ago where there are 100,000 biodynamic farmers. So it's really thriving in all sorts of climates and contexts and can be applied anywhere that food is grown and adapted to the local conditions there. So the central principle of biodynamics is that a biodynamic farm is a living organism. And so we're not just seeing the farm as a machine that's producing as much yield as possible, but how do we make a farm be something that is living and healthy and supporting itself? So this farm, Phil Green Farm in Northern California, is a certified biodynamic farm, and they're integrating fruit trees, wine grapes, ponds, pasture for their cows, all in a way that they're also restoring the natural health of the ecosystem and creating the whole farm as something that is healthy and whole, where all the different parts are integrated and supporting each other. A core principle of building that farm organism is integrating plants and animals. So if we look at natural ecosystems, they always include both plants and animals, and they're filling these complementary roles in life. But more and more our farms look like only plants or only animals. And I don't have to tell organic seed growers that there's some challenges with monocultures like this. But so when in biodynamic farms, we're really looking at how do we bring the plants and animals together in a way that they can really support each other. They're each providing different roles for the farm. And when we integrate them, then we can have a healthier living whole. So this is Hawthorne Valley Farm in New York. They have both a biodynamic dairy and also vegetables. So they're integrating two somewhat independent enterprises on the same land base in order to have a vibrant life and fertility from within the farm. So biodynamics also cultivates biodiversity. So we not only want to incorporate both plants and animals, but a large diversity of those. So that can include annual and perennial plants, all sorts of varieties of vegetables, flowers, fruit, as well as hedgerows, forests, the different kinds of plants that we might want to have on a farm, and also diversity in animals. This is Goodfoot Farm pretty close to here, and in their orchard they have both chickens and geese, and the chickens and geese, they eat different things. The chickens like more bugs and seeds, the geese like to graze the grass, and so having that diversity of animals provides more different services to the orchard, and of course they have a diversity of trees there also. So integrating those plants and animals is a core part of generating fertility from within the farm. So biodynamic farms are aspiring to really minimize what fertility they need to bring in from the outside. So that starts with building healthy living soil. Biodynamic farms are based on biologically active, vibrant soil. We don't have hydroponic in biodynamic, and we don't use chemical synthetic fertilizers. Compost is a really core element of building that on-farm fertility. So we're taking all the plant and animal matter and putting it together and transforming it into fertility for the farm. In addition to composting, practices like integrating animals, cover crops, and crop diversity, those all help to improve the health of the soil and the fertility from within the farm. So when we're making biodynamic compost, which is the core of that fertility, we use specific biodynamic preparations that help enliven that compost and enrich it. So the compost preparations are made with 6 different medicinal herbs. They're made with yarrow, chamomile, nettle, oak bark, dandelion, and valerian. And each of those 6 herbs is fermented in a very specific way that brings it into relationship with the animal kingdom, with the cycle of the year, with the earth. And then they're added in very small quantities to the compost pile. So this is, again, Mendocino Organics. They're adding preparations to their compost. So they made a really long windrow. Paula is making holes in the compost with a large pole, and then Adam's pulling a small pinch of each of those compost preparations and putting them into the pile. And biodynamic farmers usually put the preparations in again if you turn the compost after turning the compost. So what do these preparations do? They strengthen the quality of the compost. They stabilize nitrogen and other nutrients. And you'll notice I've got some references to research papers. This isn't, I'm not just making this up. There has been scientific research on these things. Multiplying the microbial diversity and also bringing more sensitivity to the composting process. So these are, there's been, as you can see on the bottom, just a couple examples of research trials looking at making compost without the preparations and with the preparations. What do the preparations actually do? There's other things that are a little bit harder to measure that many biodynamic farmers believe they do as well, but there are measurable biological effects as well. So when we take that biodynamic compost that's been made with the preparations and we put it in the soil, it's helping attune that soil to the whole farm organism, making that farm organism more self-sustaining and also increasing soil life and stable organic matter. And I think this part is really important to think about because we have an era of too much carbon in the atmosphere. And when you're increasing soil carbon, then you're bringing more carbon out of the atmosphere into the living realm. So using biodynamic compost on our soils is helping to restore balance to the climate. So in addition to the compost preparations, there are a number of spray preparations that we use in biodynamics. I'm going to talk about 2 of the primary spray preparations. So horn manure preparation is probably the most famous biodynamic preparation, made by putting cow manure into a cow horn. And it's buried over the winter months. And then the resulting preparation, once it's dug up in the spring, it resembles a nice humus, smells really nice. And we stir it in water rhythmically, creating a vortex for an hour, and then spray it out on the fields, usually in the evening before dark, and often in the spring and the fall. So this was stirring the preparation in the spring. You can see there are dandelions in the grass in Wisconsin. So the horn manure is working to enhance the relationship between the soil and plants and the life in the soil. The kind of complement to horn manure is horn silica preparation, also used a cow horn, but we're taking quartz crystals, grinding them up very finely, and burying them in the cow horn during the summer months. So it's taking the influences of the opposite part of the year. We have this finely ground silica that's stirred in the same manner, but we're doing it early in the day and spraying it up above the plants. And horn silica is working to increase plant immunity. It also strengthens photosynthesis and enhances ripening. And for instance, here in Oregon, I was here in the summer and talking to some biodynamic wine growers, and they were saying that when the veraison wasn't happening right at the right time when the grapes are turning, that spraying the horn silica can help make that happen when it feels like it's not quite happening soon enough. So together, these compost preparations, the spray preparations, they're helping the whole farm organism be in relationship with all the different elements and wider influences, and really helping those plants access the full spectrum of nutrients they need to develop that healthy immunity and more resilience to pests and diseases and extreme climate conditions. So as we have more and more unpredictability of the conditions that are on our farms, using the biodynamic preparations can really help our plants to be able to adapt to whatever comes along. So in order to do all this, we really need to cultivate awareness. And some of the ways that biodynamic farmers do that is through plant observation. This is a group of biodynamic farmers in Northern California getting together and observing yarrow, one of the herbs that's used in the compost preparations. So developing our capacity to really sense and observe the characteristics of the plant, its smell, its taste, but also what's the gesture that this plant is bringing, and how can that plant help our farm, and what are the gestures of all the plants on our farm. Similarly, just walking around our farms and observing what's going on without having a specific task at hand can really help kind of listen to what the spirit of the place is wanting to be, and being in a co-evolutionary relationship between us and our farms. Biodynamics also works in rhythm with the earth and cosmos. So many people may have heard about biodynamics being planting by the moon. It's a lot more than that, but the moon does play a part in it. So we're looking at the moon, the constellations, and also with regard to biodynamic planting calendars, the different parts of the plant. So any plant that we're growing has root, leaves, flowers, and fruit and seed, but depending on what the plant is, we might want to emphasize a different part of that. So with a strawberry, we want to emphasize the fruit. With a carrot, we don't want to emphasize the fruit, because then we're kind of encouraging it to go right to seed. So biodynamics makes a connection between the four elements and those four parts of the plant, and then connects those to the constellations in the zodiac and where the moon is in relation to those constellations, and that's the basis for biodynamic planting calendars. So this is one of several biodynamic planting calendars that's published, and we do have an example of this at the Biodynamic Association exhibit if you want to look at it more closely. So this gives us a lot of information about what's going on in the stars in the sky and with the moon, and also gives us indications about what subtle properties can be fostered in our plants on a given day. So if we look at today, Friday the 16th, we can see the sun is in Aquarius, the moon is in Aquarius, and Aquarius being an air sign means that today would be a good day to plant flower seeds. We can also see that yesterday there was a solar eclipse, and you can see it's grayed out. So a lot of this is based on the research of Maria Thun, who found that when there was an eclipse, it was not very conducive to seeds germinating. So there's a lot more than just the root, leaf, flower, fruit days on the biodynamic calendar, but a lot of people use it to help them plan their production, and also I've heard a number of people say, I wasn't really paying attention, and that's one day I planted these seeds and they didn't come up, and then I looked back at the biodynamic calendar and lo and behold, it was a grayed out day. So it's just information that you can use to help plan your farming if you're interested. So biodynamics also approaches pests and diseases holistically. So taking that healthy living soil as a foundation and the biodiversity, all the different aspects that I've been talking about, if we have a really healthy, thriving, living farm, it's similar to when we've been eating well and sleeping well and exercising. You're not as likely to get sick when you're really taking care of yourself. So the first approach to managing pests and diseases within biodynamics is building a healthy farm that doesn't need pests or diseases. And if we do have a pest or disease, we think of it as a messenger. So if we have an outbreak of a particular insect, then we want to look at, yes, there might be some acute biological control we want to take, but also we want to see what is that telling us about the balance in my farm and how can I correct that imbalance so I'm not just putting a Band-Aid on it, but really looking at the underlying cause. And then there are some specific biodynamic practices that help prevent and treat diseases such as, this is a biodynamic tree paste that I think Marjorie uses on her farm along with some other folks. Biodynamics also supports integrity and diversity in seeds and breeds. So we emphasize open pollinated, heirloom, no GMO seeds, and saving seeds within the farm as much as possible. And that's a lot of what the other folks will be talking about today. The same goes with animals, emphasizing heritage breeds and developing a genetic base within the farm if you have a large enough population of those animals that they can become locally adapted as well. And we're really focusing on treating animals with respect, letting cows have their horns, chickens have their beaks, giving the animals an appropriate feed for their diet and making sure they have space to roam around outside. And finally, biodynamics really contributes to social and economic health. So we're really focused not just on building a healthy farm, but a healthy community around the farm. So community-supported agriculture in the United States was pioneered by biodynamic farmers with the idea that we wanted to move using inspiration from Rudolf Steiner's work in economics, moving beyond a transactional market-based approach to food and farming to people really supporting the whole farm and the whole farm in turn supporting people. So there's still many biodynamic farms that are using the CSA model and really the original CSA model that's not just you pay this much for this much of a box, but how much can you contribute to support the whole farm and then taking what you need from that farm to support your family. There's also a number of initiatives incorporating biodynamic farming and other social ventures. Camp Hill Villages incorporate people with disabilities into farming as well as many other parts of life. There's also a number of Waldorf schools, which were also founded by Rudolf Steiner, that incorporate biodynamic farms. And the Pfeiffer Center in New York is another example. They are connected in a whole community of different organizations, including a retirement and old age home that's connected to some farms. So biodynamics is really trying to help reinvigorate all of society through the vibrant work on the farms and its connection to different other aspects. So the last thing I'll just say is that we have a whole biodynamic conference coming to Portland in November, so hope to see many of you there.
That was Thea Coleman. Next we'll be hearing from Nathan Corum.
Oh, I'm Nathan Gorham from Meadowlark Hearth Farm. We are in western Nebraska. High plains, about 4,000 feet, semi-arid. So there will be some pictures from the farm that gives you a context. So growing strong seed the biodynamic way, wherein lies our strength? Does it lie in dominance by being, me first, or does it lie in the ability to work together with each other? Yes, question for our time, social, economic, political question, but above all, a philosophical and spiritual question. In terms of seeds and the genetics of seed, do you have a few dominant genes for uniformity, or do you have genetic diversity for adaptability? Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Is it working? Okay. Okay, so Thea went over some of this, began in 1924. Rudolf Steiner was usually called Dr. Steiner because he had a doctorate in philosophy, and his major academic work was called The Philosophy of Freedom. It's a book. It was based on his doctoral thesis, I believe, and that's the philosophy of the unique, free, creative, spiritual individuality in the context of the universal reality out of which that individuality arises and is sustained. And Dr. Steiner always maintained that this philosophy was the basis for all of his work. And yeah, he termed the agriculture course, as we call it, the spiritual foundations for the renewal of agriculture. What did I do? Okay. Okay, so biodynamics, the dynamics of life. It is a spiritual and cultural as well as a practical and natural and scientific approach to farming and gardening. Context, as Theo said, is extremely important in biodynamics. It strives to work out of the whole and understand and pursue its ends with the widest possible macroscopic perspective, and that realization that everything is infinitely connected. So an artistic comparison might be the dynamics of music, where we work with all these polarities like tone and rhythm, harmony, interval, tone, loud and soft, fast and slow, and so on. And in the end, it creates an artistic whole out of the creativity of the artist and the medium. Sorry. So here's music and seeds together. This is our living room at the height of the harvest season, so we have some things wrapped up in sheets and tomato seeds up there and racks with tomato seeds drying, fermenting, and the music there. We live very intimately with seeds, as you can see. Okay, so likewise we speak of polarities in biodynamics, force and substance, spirit and matter, nature and culture, domestic and wild, point and periphery, order and chaos, and it goes on and on. But the most important is the creative dynamic, that third element that stands between the polarities and that connects them in the unity, out of which this new being, this new creation springs. That's really where the art comes from. So every polarity arises out of a trinity that embodies a unity. Everything is connected, everything works together, and it is in this working together that our strength lies. As living beings, we're all children of the universe, connected together in one family, one community, one body, working together. Essential concepts: the seed is a stage in the individual plant's development, a special stage. But the greater being that we're working with when we carry the seed from generation to generation is crop variety. Crop varieties are an essential and determining part of agriculture and the kind of food produced by it. And in the form of seeds, they're also an essential and determining part of our individual farms and the food produced by them. So here is Tondo Chiyoga beets. We're doing selection based on it's out of the Chiyoga line, based on taking wedges out and looking at the qualities and tasting them. And we're doing it in a social way with a group of people, and they're all trying it and evaluating it and participating in it. Each variety has a unique character that lives within the total population of plants that grow out of it. So it's not so much the seed, it's the greater being of the crop and variety we're working with when we select, let some of the plants go to seed and select. Varieties are an essential part of the greater being of agriculture, while the actual crops are part of the individuality of the farm. And I will say, Thea brought up the farm as a living organism. Biodynamics even goes farther than that and says that the farm is an individuality. So the common varieties we use truly link farms together in a greater agricultural being, just as a common language and shared ideas connect people and communities, regions, and countries. The word or logos in its true essence embodies knowledge and a meaning on a very deep and profound level. Language is not just the words in the mundane sense, but it's the common concepts and ideas that it expresses. So the words are carriers of ideas and perceptions from one person to another. The seeds are carriers of the variety and its characteristic from one season to another, from one field to another, one farm to another, one culture to another, one continent to another. And we, as growers of vegetables in particular, we're very cosmopolitan. The seeds come from all over the world. So it really connects us in a special way. This is a seed from a handful of seed I brought back when I was working in Switzerland. I brought it back on the airplane and got through with it, which I've been growing now since, well, I brought it back in 1993, grew it in Switzerland in 1992, and have been maintaining it and selecting it, and it's my pet sort of selection breeding project. It's called ter-certified. It's a snow pea, and people come and look at it, and it's gorgeous, and they say, is this an ornamental or is it for food? Yeah, so that's one of my prize loved plants. So the way we receive and work with concepts and ideas has a profound effect on who we are. Education and culture can come from standardized text, mass media. Everyone is fed from the same sort of menu of homogenized, edited fare that primes them for mass manipulation by commercial and political interest, or people can develop, live, and think freely, discovering things by observation and exploration, taking them in deeply, transforming them into something uniquely appropriate for their own being, lives, tasks, and circumstances. So here are seeds, plants, and our agricultural library in the background, and our apprentice, Flint. Or seeds, let's see. Yeah, or seeds can come from a mass market where every seed of any particular variety typically comes from a single source. Grown in monoculture, bred and maintained for static uniformity and entirely separated from the local environment the farmer and consumer depend on it for food. So our seed sources largely become totally outsourced from farming itself, commercial, academic, breeding, production, or the seeds can come from many diverse small farms, grown in context, selected where every farmer is a breeder. And this gives us varieties that are freely evolving and adapting to the natural world in a particular locale. Also, it's how we got the genetic diversity we had, because every farmer was a breeder and every farmer was a seed saver, because if you didn't do that, you didn't have anything to grow next year. So we have this rich heritage of genetic diversity that's been built up over quite a long time. And, you know, commercially, when we have the sort of industrial corporate model, they take that richness that was built up in the past, exploit it for short-term profit, and jeopardize the future. Biodynamics does just the opposite. It, past, present, and future. Here you have this trinity. It's in the present that we can receive the past and give it to the future. So we have a diversified farm. We have about 56 head of cows on our farm right now. We do a raw milk dairy. It's one of our seed apprentices, and they don't do just seed. And that provides the fertility for our farm. So our approach to seed growing, we're very intent that the seed comes out of the context the seed comes out of it, that it's a diversified farm, that it's plants and animals. That it's coming out of a whole farm organism and a farm individuality. And the individuality is like our own individuality. We are not just part of a family or a race or a nation, but we are our own individual beings. And to the extent that we grow and develop as an individual, as a free, creative individual. So the farm as an individuality is separated out of the greater landscape, and you'll see this when you go to biodynamic farms. You're entering something that's really quite unique and individual and has its distinct character, even though it's very much integrated into the landscape around it. So we plant the seed, it sprouts. Since its roots down, it's radical and it's straight up shoot. So the root goes down to the center of the earth, the shoot goes up towards the cosmos. So Mother Earth and Father Sky, this is the polarity we have to grasp in order to understand the plant and the seed. So it's a long ways from the tip of that plant to the far reaches of compost, and from that root down to the center of the earth. But if I have a compass here, that needle points north. And it's a long ways from the magnetic North Pole. The magnetic North Pole has everything to do with why that needle points north. The cosmos has everything to do with what that seed does. So we really feel like there's a very strong connection between the cosmos and the seed. I'll skip over this one. The seed is not just like a biological computer chip. with the programming and DNA, and it prints out the plant when it gets the right. So this order is built up in the seed, but the new plant only comes about when this order, if you will, goes to the background, disintegrates, and leaves a place for the created new being to come in. And to compare it with the word, as I made the comparison before, you kind of have to let go of all, grammar and structure in order to let the new one. I mean, if you just look at grammar and structure and how the letters are put together, you lose the story. So that you kind of have to have that all in the background. The story comes. Once the story's there, then you can put the letters together to express what's in there. And it's a little bit like life. The cosmos pours in. This is a quote out of the agriculture course, which describes this process. So it's a very different way of looking at genetics. So yeah, the plant grows up, reaches towards the sky. The process of seed formation is forming of male and female, cosmic male seed of father sky. It's when it falls into the womb of Mother Earth, the procreation takes place. So for the plant, literally, the sky is the father and the earth is the mother. Different with us because we're emancipated, separated. We carry our motherhood and fatherhood in us. But with the plant, it lives much more in this greater world of the cosmos and the earth. And so, just quote Rudolf Steiner, says all that happens when the pollen, goes and fertilizes the anther is that this is the preparation of the cosmic male seed from Father Sky for Mother Earth. And he says all that happens. Okay. Whoops. Oh, okay. There. That's our landscape. We live in big sky country. Very dramatic. Very dramatic weather too. Very volatile. Okay. So the concept of the plant procreation is consummated with pollination is, in the words of Rudolf Steiner, a terrible mistake, a colossal error, a capital error of materialistic botany. So we have a very different paradigm and way of looking at things and what happens with seeds and genetics. So Father Earth and Mother Sky, this is when you turn into our farm at the driveway, and our seed crops there in the background. The farm individuality, again a quote from there, very much connected with the concept behind organic agriculture, which was, the word was coined by Lord Northbourne of Kent. He talks about the farm as an organic whole. Okay. Some more sort of thoughts and ideas. I'm running short on my time, but just quickly here, looking at the population, looking at the whole thing, not just the seed, the plant through its whole process, the plant as it lives in the greater being of agriculture and the whole crop. Yeah, the plant and animals fitting. Yeah, Thea covered some of this. So yeah, plants not bred in isolation, but arising right out. So we grow all of our seed integrated in with our vegetables. We have a dairy, we have CSA, market vegetables, and we have 3 businesses: the seed, the vegetables, and the livestock, dairy and beef. Work those all together. That's cabbage that we've stored over the winter in a root cellar and brought out and planted, and it's starting to grow. I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'll go through this. Loss of genetic diversity. This is looking into our house coming in, and volatile weather. We got a hailstorm and it damaged the siding there. Since replaced it, but herbal preparations, we have our biodynamic preparations buried here in the herb garden. So, thank you.
I have been learning about biodynamics and practicing it for over 20 years now. And just a few years ago, I started a consulting business because I started to hear the word biodynamic being thrown around as if it were biological. And while biodynamics does include biological, biodynamics is specific to the way that the farm is set up as a whole farm system, and also specific to the use of the preparations. And these preparations help broaden the diversity of biology on the farm for an ultimate uptake of nutrients in the plants. And so I wanted to make sure to protect the integrity of biodynamics. I wanted people to know what it was. And so a good friend of mine owns Territorial Seed Company. And so I started to sort of offhand consult him, and they were converting their farm, London Springs Farm, to biodynamic and creating a biodynamic seed line. And that's a Territorial Seed Company. And so he's encouraged me to write a book or to consult. And so I've for many years grown seeds for myself because it's easy. I don't know why more people don't do it. You let a couple really good plants of something go to seed, and then you have enough for 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years, and which in turn made me start to go to seed swaps and give them away. All of these pictures that I have for you are just kind of arbitrary to what I'm talking about. But this is my farm, and these are seeds that I've grown. This is parsley. That was parsley before. And that's just, a couple plants. And then green onion seeds and cilantro seeds. And this giant, that's my foot right there. That's how big this turnip is. These seeds in particular, it's a mix of seeds. Let's see, those right there are called whipple beans, and then these are Jacob's cattle beans. They're mixed up because my dad was laid up and he shucked all my beans for me one year, and he didn't know there was a difference. So these I've been growing since 1999. And I've kept them going since then. I found them in the back of a seed drawer at a farm that I was caretaking, the Whipple farm. And so Mrs. Whipple, she was in her 80s then, she didn't know what they were called. And so I named them whipple beans. Well, so those beans, one year I planted everything that I had, and the deer ate all the plants, and I thought I lost them, and I was super sad. And then I went to a seed swap, and there was a giant bag of these beans, and it said whipple beans, so I knew those were my seeds, and so I got them back. And then the Jacob's cattle I haven't been growing for maybe 10 years. And so every year I select out the larger bean of the whipple beans and just replant those nicer, larger beans. They're delicious. It's a dry bush bean. So with biodynamics, the preparations, I find that not only you're getting a full nutrient uptake from these preparations, each of them has a specific assistance in the uptake of phosphorus, sulfur. It doesn't add those things to your compost, but it assists in the uptake of those things, potassium, sulfur. The horn manure helps regulate the nitrogen in the soil. And so as far as seed growing goes, the silica preparations really help with the ripening process. The 501 spray, and then I use a lot of 508, which is an equisetum. It's basically horsetail that you make a tea, and you ferment it. And when you ferment it, it becomes a biological, and it helps assist in the uptake of silica. It also helps regulate for fungus. It's a fungicide. I've had an apple tree pruning business for about 17 years, and so I use that one a lot. And I also find that the 501 spray helps increase the Brix levels in my apples. We have about 450 apple trees at our farm, and then on top of that, I prune another 280 off of the farm. I use tree paste a lot. So as far as marketing goes for the the organic retail market has been increasing in growth with $47 billion in sales in 2016. And the growth is exceeding 8%, while food sales have only got up 0.8%. Consumers are becoming more aware of supply chains, food sources, so that's only going to increase more and more and more. So with biodynamics, those products have increased through specifically the wine market and also through Whole Foods. Whole Foods market really has been supporting biodynamics for a long time. So let's see, research firms have projected that in 10 years, there'll be thousands of biodynamic products on store shelves. So that said, that was another reason that I started my consulting business, is because I wanted that to be able to go, a farmer can come and say, how do I do biodynamics? So I can help supply this need. There's this huge need out there for suppliers of biodynamic products. Someone sent me an email that someone was looking for biodynamic tomatoes for their tomato paste business. And my partner and I we have a pesto business, a superfood pesto business. And we are with the apples creating a hard cider business that'll be biodynamic. So the need for those products is just increasing more and more and more. And also the difference with organics and biodynamics is, so you have this whole farm system that's not really bringing in a lot of fertility to the farm, because the farm is ideally producing all of its own fertility, and including fertility through the uptake of the preparation. So the preparations help you to sort of mine minerals from the soil, and then there's not the need to bring in all these other things for fertility. So therefore, it's a really inexpensive way to farm because you're getting a whole system right in there, and you don't have to import all of these nutrients onto your farm. So on that scale, on the economic side, it's a very inexpensive way to farm. And yeah, if you're doing it right and paying attention to all of those things. Also, as far as seed growing with the moon, there's a lot of research out there with germination of seeds by the moon. That I find, when I plant seeds during that new moon to full moon, I get better germination. And of course, it's not always practical to try to plant within that 2-week window. But I find that, sometimes why bother doing it on the other side, because you lose your germination. And I've seen that over and over and over. And so I just plan ahead and take that time to make sure I plant within that window. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop right there and turn this over to Nathan.
So I've been growing biodynamic seed, and I and my partner have established 2 biodynamic seed companies. I worked with biodynamic seed companies and trained in Switzerland and Germany, and we at this point do seed contracts, and it's our major income, our top income on the farm, next then the vegetables and the animals. And we contract with about 7 other different seed companies. So if you have questions and whatnot during the question and answer period, I'll try to address those the best I can.
I'm Jim Fulmer. I'm the Director of Biodynamic Education with the Demeter Association. We certify biodynamic agriculture. Demeter is old, goes back to 1927 in Europe, and it is spread all over the world. So there's Demeter organizations active in 49 countries, and we're the US. And so basically the Demeter standard that I'm going to get into quickly, way too quickly, defines the term biodynamic in the US on labels and that sort of thing. Different than the NOP because it's a certification mark, but same idea, it protects it. So I thought I'd like to start here to explain the Demeter standard. I go back to a guy named James Lovelock, and so some of you, this is a generational thing, will remember James Lovelock and the Gaia hypothesis, which goes back to the 60s, early 70s. He was a NASA scientist actually working on detecting life on Mars. He came up with this hypothesis theory that the Earth basically herself is a living organism and functions that way. And so from an agricultural perspective, it seems so basic, but it's significant. You know, processes like humus formation, like photosynthesis, this interaction of the earth and the sun that Nathan was getting into. These are all inherent tools to farmers to, based on observation, just understand and work with. So the Demeter standard in the US is kind of laid out with that general understanding that you're basically working to generate inputs out of the living dynamics of your farming system itself. And a lot of those living dynamics are characters of the earth herself, things she just does. Just like the sun rises, the sun sets, the seasons change, etc. It's a core base to biodynamic agriculture, and on a practical level for us farmers, there's extreme efficiencies and tools there. So the Demeter Farm Standard looks for that. I'm not going to read Albert Howard's statement. Many of you have seen this, but it's the same thing, same idea. You know, if you think of the idea of a wilderness forest and how it operates, the fertility, the pest control, the water dynamics, they all come out of the system itself. They're not being brought in from the outside. So the base of the idea of a farm organism. And there you have it. The USA Demeter Farm Standard is basically broken into 7 principles. These are the things we look at on a farm when we're certifying a farm. And there they are: biological diversity, generating fertility internally out of the dynamics of the place, water and waterway conservation, the use of the biodynamic preparations and those wider connections that have been touched on multiple times, generating your disease and insect and weed control on farm, which means out of the life of the farm itself, integrating livestock. This particular standard looks for farmers to be reincorporating livestock back into farming systems, which is a very interesting challenge for a lot of farmers, particularly in the US. And at the end, gentle post-harvest handling, there's a lot of attention paid to how things are handled after they're harvested, basically trying to leave them alone and not mess with the integrity of the agriculture. So the interesting thing about these is when you try to break them into just individual discussions, you find you can't, because they're all interrelated. For instance, within biological diversity, you're going to find your disease and insect and weed control coming from. And these are the internal dynamics. I'll get into that here directly. Starting with the first principle, biological diversity, and I'm sorry this slide isn't working properly, but these are the things that we look for. One, there's attention paid to soil life and how soil humus forms and that sort of thing. I'll get into that in a second. There's attention to wild biodiversity reserve areas, either wild or planted. And there's attention to genetic diversity. And with that genetic diversity, that's where I'll get into some points in the standard about seed and seed production. The farm standard itself wants 10% of the land base to be set aside as wild area. So that can either be native wild area, or if that doesn't exist, like say a vineyard in Napa Valley of California where it's wall-to-wall grapes, then that has to be created internally within the system. planting it, basically. Hedgerows, flowering cover crops, that sort of thing. It's looking for 10%. Demeter will only certify a whole farm. For instance, the NOP, you can take a field and have it organic. It will only look at the whole farm. As far as seed goes, I know this is a lot of words, but I put them up there because these are some of the key things about seed that come out of this standard that are interesting and challenging for us, indeed, and the producers. So CMS hybrids are not permitted. Are you all aware of CMS, cytoplasmic male sterility? They're doing a fair amount of it here at Oregon State. It's Demeter internationally considers some of this as genetic engineering. It's got a real stress on open pollination. For instance, cereals, with the exception of maize, need to be open pollinated, can't be hybrids. Zero tolerance for GMO contamination. So seed sold as biodynamic if it's, say, corn, when tested should show none detected, which is a really challenging place to be in America, especially in some parts of America, like where you live, Nathan. Perhaps Iowa would be another example. For imported seed, it looks for biodynamic seed first. So there aren't too many sources of biodynamic seed in America. You know, there's Meadowlark Hearth, there's Territorial, Ceros, and you know, a few others, but not. There's an opportunity there in the marketplace. And also, because the idea is a farm organism, there's strong encouragement to produce seed and propagation material internally. And that's not only to close the loop. Nathan was getting into it a little bit, the idea of adapting your plants to your place. That also addresses pest control and a lot of other things within a species. We look at biological indexes when visiting farms. Here's some of them. I don't think this video is going to work. Anyhow, when visiting a biodynamic farm, you should be able to step back and see a whole myriad of things flying around. Big critters, little critters, birds, up, down, going in spirals. We look at the digestion of organic matter. Look at the soil, you know, like a Demeter inspector will report on what they see as far as earthworms and scarab beetles and that sort of thing. And now we're also, this past growing season, started taking samples from farms, measuring carbon, so basically just organic matter. What we're looking for is that the organic matter is at least maintained and ideally increased over time, and that there's not a steady drop in it. So on-farm fertility, these things that are going to pop up are things that the standard would look for before importing a lick of fertility from the outside. So it wants to see farms and farmers integrating these things. Integrating livestock, using green manures, the value of a legume. You can get almost all your nitrogen from a legume versus having to import fish and soy and everything else. The difference is you always have to be thinking in earth time and biological time, and it takes time. Composting, biodynamic compost has been mentioned a couple times already. The idea is to digest the waste stream of the farm and get it back into the farm using the compost preparations. Crop rotation. There's really interesting comparisons between the Demeter standard and the NOP, the organic standard, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. Demeter, for instance, doesn't want an annual crop to be in the same place for more than 2 years in a row, so you have to move it, versus just general words about crop rotation. The biodynamic preparations are core and foundational. Demeter requires that they're used, the 500 through the 507. And then there's a big stress on the reduction of tillage in this standard also. And more and more as this regenerative organic agriculture discussion goes forward, the function of limiting tillage is coming up more and more as far as developing humus and thus your ability to have and hold on to fertility, let alone water. It was mentioned about sequestering carbon. This is basically a humus-based farming system. So that's what we're looking for is a farming system that develops the soil humus by reducing tillage, by using green manures, by composting internally out of the living dynamics of the place, limiting the amount of stuff imported from the outside. It gets into a whole set of requirements around water and waterway conservation. So they're basically focused on two things. One, protecting groundwater and fish-bearing waterways. We're here in Oregon. Our office is in Corvallis. We started working with Salmon Safe, which is another Oregon-based organization out of Portland. Came out of the Pacific Rivers Council. And so we adopted some of those principles about riparians and waterways into the US Demeter standard. And the other key about water conservation gets back to the same value of building fertility by building organic matter and humus. You also have the ability to hold on to water. And those of you that went through soil science, they will remember, you know, these basic concepts that 80–90% of a saturated atmosphere will be held by humus. And we're moving into a world, especially here in the West, that is getting drier and drier and drier. And you know, the value of humus is greater and greater and greater. More, it builds resilience into your farm. Excuse me. With disease, insect, and weed control, again, the goal before any approved pest control material could come on the farm is that a farm should first have these things in place. So botanical diversity, habitat for predators, both of those come out of your biodiversity. Balanced nutrition, which is just key to pest control. That slide is the difference between a biodynamic grapevine and a conventional grapevine, a young one. And obviously the one that can have a root system like that is going to be more resilient. Cultural things like airflow and light penetration, say for disease control. Again, crop rotation pops up. This is core pest control and disease control to rotate crops. We look for that. With weed control, mulching, you know, another great on-farm generated input. There's, as you all know in organics, there's a whole arsenal of materials that you can import in from the outside. And this came from the Xerces Society, another Oregon-based organization, goes back to the 30s, where they took a list of commonly used organic pesticides and noted their toxicity to the surrounding environment. And you know, some of these you see pretty commonly used in organics, like spinosad, for instance, used for the olive fruit fly. Turns out that it also kills all the species of bees. So that's not only honey bees, that's all the bees, and these are your pollinators. So a lot of these organically approved pesticides are biocides. So Demeter pays more attention to that. It thus doesn't allow everything the organic standard does as far as materials brought in. The biodynamic preparations, there they are. They've been talked about a few times here. They're core to biodynamic agriculture. It's always interesting to explain these. And that, you know, they really would need an 1.5 hour workshop on their own if you really want to understand the biodynamic preparations. But I'd also argue, as a biodynamic farmer myself, the best way to understand them as a farmer is to integrate them into your own farming system, because that's where you're going to see and feel what is happening there. You know, I have to explain them a lot to all kinds of people. So what I tend to do, and one way I see these is really, these are homeopathic remedies for the earth. Again, back to that first slide, the earth is a living being, Gaia. And the biodynamic preparations are designed to heal her, with the notion that the earth is in a state of dis-ease right now. So medicine for the earth. Quite the process of making them. There's a group here in Oregon that has been making them for 40 years. How many years, Hyphen? 43? 43 years. Great resource. I'll just put this quote from Olive Witcher, who worked with a guy named George Adams. I always thought this is a profound question. I mean, we're so concerned about how the apple got to the ground, but have you ever pondered how it got to the top of the tree in the first place? Integrating livestock. In 100 years time, you know, 1+ generation, every U.S. farmstead had animals on it for a lot of reasons, not only feed, but fertility and all kinds of things. They all got taken off. They're in CAFOs. The idea is to bring them back. What does livestock give you? It gives you fertility. It gives you weed control. Those are pigs rooting under apricots in Michigan. Chickens, ferocious descendant of T-Rex. So if you're an ant, you know, or so, you know, they eat a lot of insects. Those of you that have chickens know. And related to the humus, they help conserve water, livestock. There's a lot there, but I'm going fast. This helps me. This idea of, well, this is really Alan Savory. And those of you that are familiar with the idea that the combination of the ruminant, and this is core to biodynamics, the cow, because it came from Europe. Our cow is the bison, actually, in North America. So the combination of grasslands and ruminants. So if you take like North Dakota and parts of the US that have the greatest and most fertile soil that's been built, the process was simple. It was native grasslands, native ruminant, and predators. So with the North American bison, it was wolves. The wolves, you know, it's where the border collie comes from. Basically, I have border collies and fully understand their insanity. I mean, all they want to do is herd things. The wolves basically herded the bison because they were eating them. They were picking off the weaker ones on the outside. Because of that, the bison were always kept in groups, tight groups, and they were pooping and peeing, and their hooves were working it in the soil, and they were being moved really fast. This is being mimicked by a lot of farmers that have livestock now with mob grazing. That's the idea. So not only do you get a lot of feed, but you build soil that way. And thus, you know, a good argument to integrate livestock back into farming systems, because it's how the earth builds soil. Okay, yeah, so I'll hold the slide in case it comes up because people always ask the difference between organic and Demeter. So thank you.
So we're going to transition to a little question and answer time, both for those of you here in the audience and joining us online.
I'm curious the biodynamic answer or response to two issues that I face here in the Willamette Valley as a farmer. We have acidic soils, so I'm wondering if biodynamic farmers are liming as much as I am. Also, we face a soil-borne pest that loves compost, the symphylan. And I'm wondering if just, the biodiversity does help with that issue, or if you have any experience with those two points.
So that is one thing that is imported with biodynamic farms is lime. In the Willamette Valley, because we have so much clay, you never want to use dolomite lime because that makes the clay shrink, and it inhibits the ability to hold water and moisture. So more of agricultural lime is better. And then something with the horse manure here, for some reason, is really full of symphyllums. So I avoid horse manure whenever possible because I've found that if I've used horse manure, I have a problem with symphyllums. But yes, when your biological diversity in the compost will help balance out the symphyllums.
Yeah, I can comment on that too. We're both Oregonians. So I had early on, I've been on my farm out in Kings Valley 35 years now. Early on, I had symphyllums and they're gone now. So I do attribute that to the building of the soil and the diversity, and they're there, but they're not an issue anymore. They're just part of the deal. And then the other thing about pH, yeah, our pHs are low, and yeah, you probably have to lime, but there's something about building soil humus that also buffers pH. And I don't have the research at hand to cite. Walter, maybe you know it, where, as the organic matter increases, the pH, there's a buffering capacity that happens there that you can get away with lower pHs.
And also because of when you're building that matter, you have a higher CEC, which is your cation exchange, and that's where you're holding the calcium in the soil. And then the use of 505, which is one of the preparations, and that's it's a mixture of oak bark, which is your calcium. So you do actually use less lime because of that high cation exchange, and that comes from just that building up of the soil diversity and the humus.
One of the biodynamic principles is that you try to do it within the farm as much as you can, but if it's out of balance and you need to bring something in, you consider that a remedy for a farm that's out of balance that needs to be healed in that way. But once you get it there, then you try to maintain that within the farm. So it's not wrong to bring it in if you need to balance it, but then do these practices that holds that in the soil and that keeps it within the cycle.
Yeah, just to ask a question. Actually to you, Nathan, mostly, but it has to do with looking a little bit into the future. Obviously it's clear that the biodynamics is really struggling for a new level of quality. Coming out of the way that the whole farm is set up and the way that it's running and so on. But and yeah, we could have biodynamic seed, but what does that mean, biodynamic seed? I mean, if it's just at certified Demeter, that's a 1-year thing. But for those of us who are striving to really produce a higher quality seed, there's no certification for the whole process of the breeding and what went behind that. So basically what I'm asking is if we could look into the future, is there a market and is there a an interest in developing a kind of a standard for the breeding and development and selection and longer term, you know, support for producing new kinds of varieties that actually have other attributes. And so I just wanted to ask you folks what you thought about going beyond, you know, certifying the way it's done now for a product from one year to the other, to one that actually takes into mind how that plant organism is evolving as it's being brought through a kind of a different, more synergistic farming system.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, and we do almost all of our varieties we select every year, and we maintain, unless we're doing a contract where they want to give us the stock seed, it's out of our stock. And some of the seed companies have said, we've tried yours, or they do our seed because they've trialed it, and they say, we want you to maintain the stock seed. So we keep it within the system, and it's adapting, and there's genetic drift, if you will, but genetic guidance. So we're building that up. So you're talking about biodynamic varieties, not just seed that's grown under biodynamic methods. Yeah, I have given that a lot of thought, and I want to say that most of the seed companies we contract with, they want organic seed. They do not say in the catalog that it's biodynamic seed. So when you say there's hardly any biodynamic seed available, it is there, but you don't know it's there. That's the whole thing with the market and perception, and the whole challenge of describing what biodynamic seed is in your customer relationship. So there's a lot to do there. But what brings that market is when the seed company gets your seed and they say, and try it and trial it, or they get it to sell and they say, this is what we want. It's high quality. That's what's going to make the difference. Also in the consumer market for the food, it's like, oh, there's something different here. This is what I want. And then you really have a basis, or yeah, we haven't had to pretty much go out and look for seed contracts that come looking for us. And if we do it right, I think that's how it will grow. And that's the right way it should grow and come about.
And so, Walter, you're aware of what's going on in Europe, right? Literally, there are biodynamic seed breeding initiatives. And if we could bring that over here, I think that would be fantastic.
So the question for folks who couldn't hear is around population size and genetic diversity, and how do we address that on biodynamic farms? Is it similar to advice people get otherwise, or is there something different?
To the extent that I can be said, I'm a breeder, which I'm not really. It's just mass selection. And one of the reasons we do it out of vegetable production is we are growing larger quantities, a big population we can select out of. And so, yeah, that's kind of the basis of it. And I think that the seed development should go much more back into agriculture and come off the farms for that reason, and diversified farms, and that seed, as much as possible, should come out of the vegetable crops themselves. And that's what we do, and it's an art, and it's a practice to learn how to do that so that you do keep the kind of purity that you want. And you can have isolations and different kinds of isolations, time isolations, space isolations, physical isolations, etc. That's a lot to go into, but that's how I approach it. It's not how generally seed producers and breeders approach it. Yeah.
I got a comment and also a question. I'm 19, so this is my first year being in agriculture, and what led me to is spirituality, kind of like, like what you guys are talking about. So I think it's really interesting. You guys are talking about the things I theorize about, and this is like my first introduction to biodynamics, so that's really cool that you guys are doing that. But kind of what you're saying, Nathan, about the trinity and kind of like how that is natural in nature. I've been researching a lot about fungi and how we could use that beneficially in agriculture, and I wonder if, and I know some about it because I've been researching it, but I'm wondering if you guys are actually implementing fungi in your farms, and if you have like any insight in how you guys do that or whatnot, you know. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit about that. Other folks might have things to chime in. So I was just last month, I was at the Eco Farm conference, and there's a guy, David Johnson, there who's doing a lot of research on compost and the fungal to bacteria ratio in compost and how important having a higher fungal ratio. And he's interested in doing some research on biodynamics. But if you look at the biodynamic preparations, then being buried under the ground for 6 months, that's necessarily increasing the fungal populations and fungal diversity in that, and that's bringing that into the compost, as well as things like reducing tillage. There's a lot of ways in which biodynamic practices, including the preparations, are increasing the fungal diversity. So not that that's separate from like introducing a mushroom specifically, but it's kind of that building that diversity on the farm, including the fungal diversity, is kind of integrated with biodynamic practices. Sure. So first question is if you want to learn more, how do you learn more? And second, about how you work with biodynamics and being a vegan. So in terms of learning more, the Biodynamic Association, our website, biodynamics.com, is a great resource. This fact sheet that we have here outlines a lot of what I was talking about, and it's also online. In terms of books, the two that I recommend are Biodynamic Gardening by Monty Walden and a Biodynamic Manual by Pierre Masson. And if you go into the exhibit hall, we have examples of both of those books there. So if you want to leaf through them and see if they look good to you, we partner with Steiner Books, and they have a whole bunch of biodynamic books. So there's many others, but those are kind of the two that they're both recently published, quite approachable. I tried to read the agriculture course first, and it was a little hard to get into. So I recommend reading another book first and then getting into the agriculture course. And in terms of veganism, I think it's an interesting question. I was a vegan for a number of years and a vegetarian when I started working on a biodynamic farm. And it was actually working on a biodynamic farm that led me to stop being a vegetarian. Not that I think there's anything wrong with being vegetarian, but being on a biodynamic farm, I could see that the animals played a really important role in the agricultural ecosystem, as I was talking about. And I think for me, there can be a way to respectfully work with those animals and be part of them ending their lives for different purposes in the farm. That being said, it doesn't mean that you have to partake in that to be part of the biodynamic farm model. Anyone else want to comment?
You might read also Peter Proctor's Grasp the Nettle, because he does a lot of work in India, where when they first started doing biodynamics there, it was illegal to kill a cow. So they had to come up with other methods of making those preparations. Grasp the Nettle, it's by Peter Proctor. Now, because of biodynamics, though, it is allowed to use those parts for the preparations. And to speak to that as well is these preparations are, some of them have animal sheaths. And, when you're building compost, you have a soil aggregate, either sand, silica, or clay. And in the compost pile, to get that balance, you have a bacteria attaches to it and waits for a fungus, or a fungus will attach to it and wait for the symbiotic bacteria. And it's sort of my observation that these are perfect bacterial fungal combinations that uptake specific nutrients. So there is a reason to use those animal parts, and always, anytime that I've ever been involved with preparation makings, those animals are really well treated. And so as far as that ethical aspect of it, it's not like they're from a slaughterhouse or something like that.
I know you all have many more questions and a lot more discussions to have, but we are out of time.